Welcome back to the Quantum Couch. I'm your host, Dr. Ina Conboy. Today's episode is part 2 of the conversation that was started a week ago on consciousness and the nature of reality with Dr. Jeffrey Dunne, who is the president of the International Consciousness Research Laboratories, ICRL. So please, without further ado, enjoy part 2.
There's a tremendous amount of stuff that we don't hear about.
Touche.
Yeah, it's driven by the way people want to see the world. So we have an expectation for the way the world is, driven largely by the people who are influential in drawing those pictures. In some sense, it may be as simple as if I'm going to get my funding, I have to make sure that you don't. And therefore, I'm going to predispose the decision makers to accept one model of reality and downplay others. And a lot of it depends on the culture that you grow up in. So, for example, if you grow up in the United States, there's a certain expectation on what is considered acceptable reality. If you go to Brazil, which tends to have a lot of examples of things that fall outside that realm, there are examples there that are mind-blowing. I'll give you one particular case, and I can't remember the woman's name. It's terrible. Um, nope, I'm not going to come up with it. I'll find it later. We'll post her or whatever. Because she's got like 4 names, and my memory's terrible. But this is a woman who, for the course of 70 years, has been doing some kind of spiritual healing or cleansing, is what she calls it, with the process of summoning physical objects out of a pile of cotton. Okay.
Oh my God,
Now,
I've heard about her. Holy
okay.
moly, I forgot her name too.
And Cardinia something more. Not, anyway, if you look it up while I'm talking about it right now, I'm not even saying that you have to believe it or not. I personally have seen enough of the videos. I have friends who have been there in person and what have you, and I've looked at this and said, you know what? If this woman is faking it, she's been faking it for 70 years, multiple times a day, 7 days a week, literally for however many 7 decades, with not getting paid, and the requirements for doing this as a fake, you'd have to be like David Copperfield level magician. And it's hard for me to wrap my head around somebody who's like, I'm just going to do the same show over and over for 70 years for no reason. Like, that's a little weird to me. But you don't actually need to believe this. The point being, here's somebody who's summoning physical objects out of a pile of cotton. I've been in the realm of consciousness studies since I was, I don't know, 11, right? So I'm coming up on 50 years myself, and I never heard of this until like 3 years ago. How did I get 45 years through this and I never heard about this person, right? It's because the information really does not flow well. It's very stifled in its own little stovepipes. If you're not right there, people are not sharing that kind of information broadly. And as a consequence, we don't hear about a lot of these things. Same thing with syntropy. How is it that, because I went through school, I never learned about this. In undergraduate as an engineer, I went through all of physics, all the equations, never heard about it in any of that. How is it that I got there? Well, because it's not something that we're promoting or even accepting in the usual mainstream scientific community. Sorry. Anyway,
So when you
yeah.
say no. So when you were saying summoning from like cotton balls, like the process was like she looks through cotton balls and finds figurines that she wants. Like what does that even look like?
So it is, she'll have there's a pile of sort of shredded cotton, and she apparently began using cotton early in her life because prior to that, it was happening. She would have things that would just sort of fall from the ceiling. And that, like, if you have a knife that's falling from the ceiling, it's a little bit dangerous, right? So she describes herself as having been taught how to control this in a safer way. And the spirits who had taught her how to do this control. And so she has a pile of cotton, shredded cotton, and she will then start digging through it and pulling out different objects. And they tend to
Like
be
she's not like doing it with her hands. She's just like pulls them out.
she's like reaching in and will pull something out of the pile.
That
And
looks like
these
a
things,
rabbit.
yeah.
Like for
So
example.
a lot of it are things that are that you would expect to see, like having been discarded somewhere, an old candle, a belt buckle, whatever it is. But some of them have been pretty large things. Like there was one case that my friend was telling me about where she had pulled out a dead goat. Um, it's
Like,
like,
wait, hold on a second. Made out of cotton or like a
no,
literal dead goat?
no, like a literal dead goat, like a belt buckle made out of metal, a small statue made out of wood,
Oh,
whatever.
wow.
I mean, it's
So she's not like manifesting from cotton material. It's just within the cotton, she like
It's
like
more like
somehow
the
summons
cotton
these things.
is the portal, uh, that she's reaching into and
Holy
pulling these things
moly.
out of. Oh, it's mind-blowing. It's how to think that there's something like that, and then you talk to people in Brazil, and they're like, "Yeah." Like,
Oh, that's just another neighbor. You
right,
should see the person on the other street.
right, and it's incredible that, when you talk to people who are from that area, they're like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, we know. Oh, yeah, she does a really good job." There's a couple of other people who are like, "What?" Um, but the culture is one where people they're more accustomed to the idea of it, right? And so it's not as mind-blowing to them. Whereas in the US, you're like, because I mean, I heard about this, and there's a physicist part of me going, no, 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 right? But you look at it and you're like, well, I'm watching it happen now. Admittedly, I'm watching it on a video, but I have friends who've been there and seen it in person. You're like, okay, and they've had enough people who've gone and said, is this a fraud? But again, the woman's been doing it for 70 years. Millions of people have witnessed this firsthand. You're like, all right. It becomes harder to dismiss as fraud when you realize you're fighting against. There's a lot of conspiracy you have to hypothesize uh, in order to dismiss it.
Which,
Um,
for good reason, there have been plenty of people who have been gifted throughout time, and there have been plenty of people who were charlatans trying to make money off of the same exact thing.
Exactly. So it's a natural skepticism, and I think there's
Hmm.
nothing wrong with being skeptical about any of these things that you look at it. The only concern is when you allow your skepticism to be the basis of dismissal, as opposed to the motivation for looking into it. Right? Saying,
Sure.
okay, is this possible? What is it that I really have to give up? And is there reasons for this? And in this particular case, the idea that a physical thing has to have continuity in space, I have to give up because at one point it was not there and at this point it is. On the other hand, we know that there are things that happen like that. So we're accustomed to that in quantum mechanics, certainly. We've stopped questioning whether or not a particle can quantum mechanically tunnel from one point to another. Everybody's gone, all right, it's not supposed to be physically possible, but it clearly is happening. So in quantum mechanics, we're comfortable with it. In Brazil, are you
Wait,
comfortable with that? Right? Like
can you explain a little bit the quantum mechanics part? Can you break it down for like 101
for
for a
one on
physician who doesn't understand things like that?
Now, in subatomic particle behaviors, you can take some particle, let's say we'll take an electron, we're going to stick it in a region of space
Hmm.
where it's contained. And in order to get out of that space, it would to have a certain amount of energy to sort of, you can imagine, sort of the metaphor that's used is sort of bounce out of the cup that it's in, right? So you think of a marble maybe sort of rolling around at the bottom of a bowl, and the only way it could get out of the bowl is if it gets all the way to the top of the bowl and goes over. But that takes a certain amount of energy. It's got to have
Hmm.
enough energy to get up the lip and then out. This electron doesn't have that much energy. It's halfway down the bowl and it's just kind of doing its thing and it's moving around. But at some point, you look and the electron's no longer bouncing around the bowl. It's gone to this bowl over here. It's somewhere
Hmm.
else. And it's not supposed to be possible in a classical sense. It never had the energy to get out of this bowl in order to get into the
Hmm.
other bowl. And yet it did. All right, and they call it the term for that is quantum mechanical tunneling. It gets to
Hmm.
the edge of the bowl, and at some point it just says, "I'm tired of being in here." Anthropomorphizing, right? I'm going to the next one, and it just appears in the other one.
Hmm.
So this is a known effect, and in fact, it's used in our modern technological devices, diodes, light emitting diodes, and all sorts of other things that use this process. As a predictable thing. So we know that it's something that we count on a day-to-day basis, even though classically speaking, it's not supposed to happen. But in the realm of quantum mechanics, okay, it is a possibility, and we revise the way that we see the nature of reality as a consequence of this. Um,
Hmm.
when you're talking about summoning a goat, right? I mean, the odds along the same principles of that are considerably smaller. In theory, it's supposed to be able to happen quantum mechanically, but we don't allow for ourselves to entertain the possibility that there may be something else at play, like that space itself is in fact not really the way that we envision it. It's not the same construct, the same way that time, the most sensible interpretation, time being a cognitive tool, space, also a cognitive tool. How is it that I can have intertwined particles across the distance in the universe? Very difficult to intellectually explain if space is fundamental. Extremely easy to explain if space is a cognitive tool. Then you don't have
Mm.
to worry about the fact that they're intertwined. Well, of course they're intertwined, and I just happen to be describing one in a different way as describing the other. Um, the same kinds of things of like, why
Mm.
is it that the and I forget the order of these, but like the mother rabbit on the submarine and the baby rabbits on land, and one of them gets the babies get killed, and the mother responds to that, and they're not supposed to have any connection whatsoever. They don't have any whatever, and yet there is a response, right? There's that feeling, or something not quite so gruesome, but well, it is kind of gruesome. Like, somebody who wakes up and is like, something's happened to my friend. I know it. And then they find
Hmm.
out something terrible has happened. It's not supposed to happen, right? We're separated by space. There's not supposed to be a signaling thing that happens there, and yet it is, right? And that's because we downplay the idea that proximity has other ways of expressing itself besides distance measured in miles, right?
Hmm.
There's lots of different ways that we can be proximate to one another in terms of emotional connection, similarity, and whatever. Uh, if we assume that the idea of space is an externally fixed objective thing, it becomes very difficult to explain. If we say space is a cognitive tool to allow us to explain the experiences that we're having, not difficult to explain at all. It's a very sensible thing. And the same thing tying back to the experiments that were done. If I sit in front of the device that's generating random numbers and I have a certain effect, what if I go into the next room? What if I go into the next building? What if I go into the next state? What if I go halfway around the world? And so all those experiments were done. And what they found was it has no impact whatsoever. You have the same influence on the device if you're sitting in front of it or if you're 5,000 miles away. The distance is not a relevant factor in how your intentions affect the system. Um, and in terms of perception as well, remote viewing and so forth. If you are trying to get some kind of information about something that is very close or something that's far away, it doesn't matter. Space isn't a relevant player in that.
Hmm.
Okay.
So to summarize everything, well, I'm not even going to be very good at summarizing this, but I guess I'm trying to think this through in my own mind. So what you're kind of saying, perhaps correct me if I am misinterpreting, is that consciousness is almost fundamental to existence, meaning that you cannot break down consciousness even more. It's like one of the main like building blocks of the universe, whereas space and time have been in some ways created and less fundamental. They're not even less fundamental, non-fundamental to our universe, and there may be constructs to understand particular aspects of our existence, but they do not explain in a bigger way the existence of the universe at large. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's beautifully put. It really is, right? It's and the only thing I'll add to that, which is not in any way
Please.
taking away, because what you said is exactly right, is just to say even though time, space, these are cognitive tools, is not to say that they don't have value, right? They're extremely valuable tools. They allow us to have a life experience, to do things that we want to do, to be able to explain them to ourselves in terms of remembering what we've experienced, explain them to others in terms of sharing experiences and so forth. They're incredibly valuable tools, right? And we have established a strong consensus within humanity that because we use all the same language, the same tools, if you will, to describe the experiences that we have, that's very powerful, right? The only thing is when we say that the tools or the language now has an existence unto itself, and that anything, and this is the dangerous part, anything that doesn't fall within that language, therefore cannot be real, cannot exist. Well, there we've made the terrible leap of I don't even know what to call it, of the, we've broken the whole model. It's one thing to say that, hey, I'm going to use this language to talk about this, and it's another thing to say you're not allowed to talk about anything else that doesn't use that language, and therefore it must not exist, right? That's a terrible misappropriation of the use of language, right? So there's lots of experiences that cannot be explained using the models of time and space. Doesn't mean they don't exist. It doesn't mean that they're not real. In fact, our experiences of them should be the first place that we go. I have this experience. What can I do with it? Not should I ignore it? But of course, we train ourselves as a species to do this all the time, and it starts at a very, very young age. And it's a convenience, right? And if you've got your child and they can't get to sleep because they're worried about the monster under the bed, and you're tired as the parent, and you want them to go to sleep, and you say things like, "Don't worry, that's just your imagination," right? And it feels look how clever I am. Now they're not worried about it and we can all go to sleep, right? But what a horrid thing to say to your child. It's just your imagination. Like, what could possibly be more important in the development of a person than their imagination and all the things that that imagination has to offer us as individuals and our experiences in building our powers of intuition and building our ability to interpret things in multiple perspectives and all these other things. To downplay that, well, that's just your imagination. So if you're imagining it, that's
Mhm.
not real. Don't pay attention to it. And of course, in doing that, we shut
Yeah.
people down at an incredibly early age. We start to curtail their ability to have any kind of experiences that don't fit in with what their parents are telling them is acceptable. Um, and if we could stop doing that, we would have a much more a society with much more open minds, and I think more creativity and more potential for doing some really amazing stuff. Um,
And I think what you're touching upon is also very similar to my realm of psychotherapy and understanding humans on a more like existential humanistic level, is that we also are very powerful at creating our own meaning. And so, in a way, what you're saying is that the constructs of space and time, while they're very real, they have been more constructed by the biology and the reality, I guess, that we perceive. Um, and that our I guess our minds, our consciousness is a very powerful thing. And so what we create can be and is very real to us. Kind of gives us the idea of like hypnosis or hypnotic suggestions or placebo effects. Like the reason we do a lot of testing against placebo when we do scientific research is because our mind is so powerful. We can create the reality of healing in a very, very powerful way. Um,
yeah,
outside of what we really understand sometimes in science too.
yeah,
Um, which kind
and
of like there's like common threads there.
right. And the assertion of, of meaning in all of this, well, that's really what we do. We have some kind of sensation or experience, and we find a way to assert meaning to that. Depending on how much effort we put into it, we also assert value onto that, right? But we're asserting the meaning, the interpretation of what's there. We do this in a common way, and if we all assert roughly the same meaning, then we say, aha, that is the meaning. It's objective and it's on its own, and therefore you have the right meaning or the wrong meaning. if you agree with 95% of the people, then that's the right meaning. And if you agree with 5%, that's the wrong meaning. But we forget that it was us in the first place that was ascribing the meaning to the experience, right? We were the ones who were putting the structure in place for how we experience the universe. The importance of that is that if you forget that you were in that process, it's easy to forget that you actually have some influence in that process. But what we're seeing is that you do have influence. You have influence, of course, in the way that you respond to that, but even you have influence in the way that it manifests as a whole, such as getting more high numbers than low numbers on this device or whatever it is, right? And remaining responsible for the reality that is out there, that is your reality, gives you, well, a lot more influence in the world that you're living in, and B, requires you to be a little bit more responsible for the way that you respond to it, right? If you're going to have a negative set of intentions on things, then you have to accept, well, you may be putting something into the universe there that is resulting in the way that things are going, as opposed to having another intention that things go a different way. And it's a very convoluted, intertwined cycle with itself, because we are very convoluted, intertwined beings, right? Um,
So I'm really curious as you're talking about this. So I've mentioned Thomas Campbell's The Big Toe primarily because I'm in the process of reading his book. I'm reading like 5 different books at the same time. I don't know if anyone else has this issue, but I definitely have that issue. And so one of his biggest theories is that we're living in a some sort of simulation. The consciousness has basically created this world that we're in, and that we are as humans like avatars for the consciousness. And so the world that we have rules in it, and there are the physics rules, but they're not like the ultimate rules. Like they're not the rules of the consciousness per se. Um, have you come across that theory or similar theories? And what are your thoughts about that?
Certainly come across. I haven't read his book specifically, so I couldn't speak to exactly the way that he
Hmm.
uses those terms. But the idea of simulation, I'm not a fan of using the term simulation. Although I think that the pieces that underlie that, I'm in agreement with. The reason that I don't like the idea of simulation is that it implies that there's sort of 2 different levels of what's going on. There's the reality level, and then within the reality, there's a simulation. And I don't, for me, make those distinctions. I think
Mm.
what a way to describe it that I feel more comfortable with is to say that there is there is a reality. There's the way that we experience that is driven by the meaning assigning process that we have. In many ways, it's sort of like saying, hey, here's a mathematical space. There's the x-axis that goes this way, and there's the y-axis that goes that way. You say, what's the value of y at x equals 3? And it's like, well, there isn't a value of y at x equals 3 until I tell you what the function is, right? If the function is y equals x, then the value of y at x equals 3 is 3. If the function I apply is x squared, then the value of y at x equals 3 is 9. Okay, well, what's the function? So to me, what consciousness is doing is determining the function. Now, you and I both have a general agreement about what is out there in the world. Why? Because we're using basically the same function. So we have an agreement on what that looks like. Me and, say, Mount Everest, we probably don't have a particularly common way of describing the function. Our functions are probably fundamentally different. And so what is it, x equals 3 for me is not going to look anything like what the mountain would put at x equals 3 because its function is entirely different. And so there's no commonality. I don't have the ability, in the lack of that commonality, I don't have a good way of communicating across that. It makes it more challenging. There are ways of getting around that, right? Of sort of getting out of your regular reality into others, and that's fine. That's another topic. But the point being that there is what's out there is part driven largely by the function that we're applying to it. So because we're determining isn't even the right word. We're agreeing on the function that we're going to use, and we're taught it by our entire society, by our history, by everything, more or less the same. We get roughly the same reality, the same experienced reality, and we can talk about it effectively. So in that sense, you could say, what's the simulation aspect of it? It's not, to me, a simulation. It's simply an agreed on interpretation of how we're going to have an experience and reflect on that. So I look at a piece of paper and there's a picture on it and I call that red, and you agree and you call that red. And then we're like, oh yeah, we're able to talk about it in a meaningful way. We both agree on that. On the other hand, we don't really know that your red is the same thing as my red. Your red may be my green. Fine. And in fact, your red may be my mint. It may be my F sharp, right? We don't actually know any of that. All we know is we've got an agreement on the whole thing. And there's implications that it's not necessarily absolutely set, right? There are synesthesia, people with synesthesia who say,
Hmm.
I just experience it differently. To them, it's mint. It's got those aspects of it. The mapping, the language that they use puts it in a different way of expressing it. Okay, that's fine, right? But for the most part, 95% of people all agree it's red, and therefore we all say it's red. We get along. We're able to talk about it, and we have the shared, this, or at least illusion of shared agreement that we're experiencing
Mm.
exactly the same thing. But it's not so anyway, back to your point, it's not so much that it's a simulation, it's that it's a consensus agreement on the way we're going to talk about having experiences and relate it to the rest of our lives. But we are still the ones, I would argue, who are putting the mapping, the equation into the situation.
Hmm. I'm sure you've come across different traditions, different spiritual traditions where they kind of have this idea of different levels of the world where you're divided. And so, for example, in Kabbalah, the idea is that the level that the world that we're in is representative in some way of the world above. But each world above, and I think there are several levels. I'm forgetting how many, 5 or 7, something like that. Forgetting my traditions here. Is that it's there's like more real. Each level is more and more encompassing in some way, but but our world is maybe one of the lowest ones, but is representative in some way of the higher realms of existence. And it makes a lot of sense to me, not from a religious point of view, but more so where perhaps maybe instead of a simulation, there is something that's above, kind of like when we talked about near-death experience, when the consciousness leaves the body, it can see more, that once we're no longer in this particular physical world, there's something more than we can see, we as being consciousness or being parts of consciousness, and then there are different levels of it. What do you think about that?
I think the experience of it makes a lot of sense to me. Certainly, I've had those, personally. I've talked to, of course, a great many people who have as well, and find great value in that. In terms of relating it to what I was saying before, we said that we have a certain language that we use, a mapping, if you will, to say we're going to have this
Hmm.
agreement on reality. We're not required to just have one, right? We, in different circumstances, we have different ways of relating to different things. I can talk about my experience of you in terms of describing the color of your shirt, the styling of your hair, all these fine details that are taken in a particular way. But I can also use a different language to talk about the feeling that I have about you, the sense that I get from you, all these other kinds of things that if you try to say, well, say somebody who talks about seeing somebody's aura, well, is that the same seeing as the seeing that I use to see the color of your shirt, or is it a different kind of flavor to that? If you And some people don't say, I don't see auras, I sense auras, or I hear auras, hear sounds, or whatever it is, right? Like, we're using the language to do that, but the mappings that we use can be different. So if you think about these different levels of reality, it makes a lot of sense that, yeah, we could have completely different levels that are useful in their own particular way. If I want to talk about the day to day and how to go to the grocery store and buy milk, there's one. If I want to talk about the nature of connectedness and how I'm truly going to understand the love that I feel for this particular person, it's a different level, a different language is probably going to be more convenient in doing that, a different kind of mapping that allows me to focus in on the things that really matter for that kind
Hmm.
of topic as opposed to something else. So if I want to talk about my interconnectedness to the universe, it's going to be a different language than if I'm trying to explain to my mechanic why my car is making a funny sound. I don't actually want to talk about my interconnectedness with the carburetor. Like that's not helping the person, right? Different language, different model. So I think that those all can play in the same way. It's just a
Hmm.
question: what is it that's most important to achieve with the language that you're using or the model to describe reality that way? Um,
Hmm.
and that they all can very easily and sensibly coexist with each other. I, for example, found that when I first learned about chakras, and there's okay, well, you have 7 chakras and do this sort of thing, and I would sit and I'd meditate a lot as a child and whatever, and I would feel this, and I'm like, I I'm not getting it. I feel 5 chakras. I feel 5 centers within myself, not 7, and I would like, "What is it?" And I'm like, "It's not there." And I'm like, "All right, well, that's not it." And later, I don't know, 30 years later or something like that, or 40 years later, I came across somebody who was like, "Well, yeah, there are other systems that only have 5 chakras in it." I'm like, "Oh, I did not
Really?
know that." Yeah, I wish I could remember what the name of the systems were. But I'm terrible with remembering those sorts of things, but it's like, "Oh, well, then that does make sense, right?" For some people, there's a what matters is the resolution in a particular way. Other people, it's not so much, right? In the same way that, me, somebody shows me 2 different shades of purple, and I'm like, "Yeah, that's purple." And other people, are like, "That's absolutely not purple, that's fuchsia." "Really? Because it looks like purple." Like, I'm not getting it. Um, but, we all have our what matters to us in particular aspects, right? For me, 5. 5 was a number that worked for the things that I cared about. Other people, it's 7. Other people, I think there's ones that have 12 or 13 or something like that. Very finely, tuned to the needs that they have for it.
So, kind of veering a little bit into a different direction, because I really want to make sure I ask you these questions before our time is up. I am really curious to know, what are you working on? Like, what is ICRL about? And I know that you have published a wonderful book, which we've discussed. I'm reading, which I really, by the way, like, and I recommend all of the listeners to read the book. It's called Nexus. It's really fantastic. So if you're at all a science fiction lover, this is great read, truly. So what are you working on at this time?
Cool. Yeah. Um, so A lot of so I'll mention in terms of I appreciate you bringing up Nexus, and for people who are interested in it, it's the one thing I'll mention is that if you found it kind of curious what I was talking about in terms of syntropy, but aren't really interested in diving into equations, this might be the book for you because the whole point of it was to talk about syntropy in a very approachable way,
Hmm.
and but also about the importance of balance and perspectives and keeping open mind and stuff like that. So in
By the way,
terms
I
of
really love the dedication you wrote on the book for your mom. That
oh,
dedication,
thank
in
you.
terms of just balancing, it touched my heart. I even read it to my husband. I was like, this is such a nice dedication. It's beautifully written.
Thank you. Thank you. So for ICRL, there's a variety of different things that we are doing. The organization itself was started in 1996 by my mother and Dr. Robert John to carry on the legacy of the PEAR Lab and the things that they were doing. And there are three. It was founded with 3 basic tenets or pillars. One is to continue the research. One is to develop applications that show how this research can actually be used to make the world a better place. And then the third is an education one to help people understand what was found and so forth. And those are
Hmm.
still the cornerstones of what ICRL does today. Now, I took over as the president of the organization when my mother passed away several years ago. And so naturally the character of the way we go about that has changed. So things are a little bit different now than they were before. Prior to this, also because Brenda and Bob were at, you know, getting on in years. And they were tired after all this time. They're in their 70s, the time when a lot of this was happening. So the original activities of the organization were um, doing or supporting talks that people would give, writing and publishing books that people had, and supporting at an advisory level different research activities that some people were doing. And those were the three things that really were the activities. When I stepped in, there were a variety of other things that I kind of added into the mix. And so one of them was a strong focus on art, because as we've talked about, part of the challenge that we face in understanding consciousness and what it is and its role in reality is that the language that we use is limiting. If we
Mm,
continue to use language that's, for example, mathematics based, we're going to lose a lot of the things that mathematics is not really a well designed language to talk about, the subjective aspects especially. So there's a strong emphasis now that's rising on art. Um, and that plays into all of these sorts of things. So we continue to work on research. We've got a couple of uh, research projects that we've been doing for the last few years, looking at, for example, how we can look at changes in sort of states of consciousness at moment of death, by looking
mhm.
at random number generator output in intensive care units when people die, in hospice when people are dying, in ambulances and things like that. That's a collaborative activity that we do with an absolutely fantastic organization called Meta. There's a group of scientists actually who come together, Meta and the Scientific and Medical Network, ICRL. We are all organizations that support this group of about a half a dozen scientists who are doing this sort of thing. So there's experiments that are like that. We continue to do this very research. There's the outreach aspect of this and bringing people together to learn about things, through talks we continue to do.
Mhm.
For me, I am stressing more and more engaged activities. So, for example, bringing people together to have discussions. We have a series called Exploring Consciousness, which is, hey, I'm going to introduce this topic for 5 minutes, and then everybody on the call shares their own thing. It's not that there's one person talks and everybody else receives. We're all talking. And then most recently, in sort of the next stage of this, which is called experiencing consciousness, where we get together and then we just do it. It's not so much about talking about anything. It's just, we do it. The first one we ran
Mhm.
in January, for example, is using art as a tool for inner exploration. The second one that's going to be coming up next week is on doing remote viewing. We're going to do
I
it.
signed up.
And it's,
I
so
signed up.
so we're trying to bring people together to really
Mhm.
explore this in as meaningful a way as possible. And some things that we do bring people together in person, like retreats for 3 or 4 days, where people will have a variety of experiences and be able to talk about it and share what it meant to them, and look at for the commonalities and differences in the way different people do it. So there's a lot of that's building up our experiences. But ultimately, I think one of the driving pieces of this is recognizing that there are a lot of organizations in the world who recognize, say, that consciousness matters, and in understanding that, we can see a path to saying, we're not independent, isolated beings floating around in space with having nothing to do with each other. We're part
Mm,
of an interconnected whole. We're cells in a body, if you will, right? And the interconnectedness of us is as, if not more, important than us as individuals, because it puts us in the context that really makes us alive. Literally the same way that the cell in my finger, if I took it away from my finger, is not the same cell as it was when it was in my finger. It's the fact that it's part of the body is intrinsically important, just as recognizing that we are part of reality and we're connected this way is a necessary awareness for us to truly be alive, in the way that is natural. So I'm trying to do that at the individual level, of course, but also the organizational level. So I mentioned, for example, the different organizations just in this conversation, the Perry Center, the Scientific and Medical Network, Meta, and so forth. These are all organizations where you say, we're all doing wonderful things and we should do them together. we we should be connecting. Not to say that we do exactly the same thing. We don't want that, right? But a strong emphasis for ICRL is building those bridges so that we're doing things in concert, right? And we get the benefit of the coherence of organizations that come together. So I'm sort of on this unending quest to find organizations who have the right mindset. They're coming from good, heart-centered, ethical places, trying to make a difference in the world, and bringing them together so that they can be more effective as part of an ecosystem than they can at an individual level. And that's been a big thing for me and for ICRL in recent years is trying to build those connections and those bridges. Um, and yeah, so there's if I feel like I've only tapped the surface, but suffice it to say, there's a lot of different things that are going on, some online, many in person, writing papers, continuing to explore and build models of the way all this comes together. It's exciting and busy.
Yeah, and it's beautiful. I love all of that. So, what is your website? How could people find out more about ICRL and the work that you're doing?
It's really easy to remember. It's icrl.org. If you go to https
Easy enough.
/ icrl.org, and on that site we put on the main page. There's a little bit about us, and on the other side of it is like, hey, here are the things that are coming up and the things that have recently happened. So that if you want to do something online or in person, you'll be able to see all the different things that are there. But there's a lot of resources that are on there that are archives of things that we've done in the past, hundreds of articles that have come out of ICRL and PEAR. Uh, when we hold meetups and other events, we put all of our videos and things. So it's a great resource for learning more about it, and a way of connecting in, because we've got this year alone, we've got easily a half a dozen projects that are overwhelming the people that we have already. So it's a lot of opportunity if people want to get involved and want to do things either as participants or being part of a research program or a capability. One of the things that we're in the process of doing right now is developing a portion of the website that will allow people to have like the pair-like experience. All right, here,
Hmm.
try to have, play this game and see what maybe your intention is changing things in ways that you didn't realize were possible. And so putting that in there along with, the necessary resources for somebody who's done this now to go, wait a minute, I, d- I did what? Help me understand that. And for us, the goal is to provide the resources that aren't prescriptive. We're not gonna say, well, this is what you did. This is what we're gonna be much more focused on. Here are the questions that are worth exploring for you, and here's some background information that you might find useful, not to tell somebody what they should conclude, but to help them reach their own conclusions about it, which is really important, because at the end of the day, the people who really understand this are the people who've explored the ideas, right? You don't really want somebody who just repeats what somebody else told them. You want somebody to be able to say, I thought about this and I see why I've come to the conclusions that I've had. Right? I know for myself over the course of my life, my ideas of how all this stuff works has changed a dozen times at least. I come across some new piece of information and go, oh, oh, that's not that doesn't work with the model I had. I need to back up. I need to rebuild. And that's, it's work. It takes time, but it's ultimately what everybody should do for themselves is,
Sure.
uh, find out what makes sense to them and what feels right to them. Know your own assumptions. So,
Know your own assumptions. Well, are you ready for lightning round questions, Jeff?
as far as one can ever be, I'm certainly excited for lightning round questions.
Okay,
Yeah.
question number
Falafel.
one.
That's my okay. No, wait, that's not.
Falafel? No, no,
Wait,
that's the wrong
that's not.
answer.
That's not. Yeah, sorry. Okay.
No. Question number one. Aliens, yay or nay?
Not as normally interpreted.
Oh, come on. You got to give us a bit more than that. What,
Oh,
what
I
does
thought it
that
just had to be
mean?
really brief. So there are, in my mind, in the way that I view things, there are a lot of intelligences, if you want to call them that, spirits, aspects of reality that have a consciousness to them that is capable of interacting with us. whether or not those things are intrinsic to a place like Earth is already taking an assumption, placing an assumption that I don't place, which is that space is fundamental. So how do I tell you whether or not it's somebody who's extra Earth, extraterrestrial, or interterrestrial? I'm a little worried about that. Are there intelligences that are not human that we interact with? I have no doubt that there are. Do they manifest themselves as important for them to think of themselves as being from someplace that's not Earth? I have no way of knowing that. Um, but I do think that there are entities, whether you think of them as being UAP type entities outside of Earth, if you think of them as the elves of Celtic mythology, or you think of them as anything else, we have had an entire human history of people interacting with things that aren't standard issue human. And it's really hard to believe that there aren't things out there that aren't standard, that it's hard to imagine there aren't things that are non-standard issue humans out there. So is that a yes? Maybe. I hesitate to assert whether or not they're
Yeah.
arriving here in spaceships.
That's a fantastic answer. A very open-minded and open-ended answer. Excellent. Okay.
Okay.
Question number 2. What do you imagine our world to look like in 300 years?
Ooh, that's a great question. There's a couple of different paths forward that I can envision. There's the fear-based one, which is it's this desolate, war-torn, barely inhabitable place where
Oh, I hope
cockroaches rule.
not.
And I really hope not, right? Like, we've sort of found a way to continue to survive in whatever unenlightened way we possibly can, that is probably all governed by artificial intelligence, and we just do the things that we're told. And that also kind of scares me. There are healthier ones that I would love to see come out of this, such as we really take a hard look at ourselves and ask why there are so few countries in the world that use gross national happiness as their metric, right? Why is it that, like, Bhutan is the only country that I have heard of that actually uses that? And you hear there's a country that uses gross national happiness to make their decisions. Why aren't all of our countries using happiness as a way to make our decisions? Isn't that kind of really sensible? And where we look at this and we go, wait a minute, what is it that we're really interested in? Is it money or is it happiness? Is it power or is it health? And we take a step back and realize this is dysfunctional. What we're living in now is dysfunctional, and we're going to change this, right? So we're going to start raising our children to be open-minded, right? To value the opportunity to make mistakes and learn from them, which we don't, right? Where kids are punished for making mistakes. And we said, you don't get punished for making mistakes. You get celebrated for making mistakes and learning from them. That's fantastic. Mistakes are wonderful. That's how we learn, right? Nobody should feel bad about making a mistake. We should rejoice in it, right? And a culture that comes out of that, right? Now, this is a culture that's going to recognize the strength that can be found in diversity, because you're like, you can see something from an angle that I can't see it from. What an incredible gift, right? That's a culture where somebody says, you've told me something about myself that I didn't know. Thank you, right? And if I didn't feel good about what you said, thank you 10 times over, because you're pointing out something that now tells me, wait a minute, I have growth that I want to work on here, right? A totally different way of looking at this. If we could actually put that in place, now 300 years from now, we're going to live in a world where we're functioning. I'm not saying that we're going to have the same hierarchy as a hive of bees or a colony of ants. I hope we're not all just following the instructions of one person, but we're working as truly an integrated species, right? We're all in it to benefit the species as a whole. And as a consequence, every one of us is going to be happier and healthier and more satisfied with the lives that we're living. That's the future that I would really like to see. When you have that future, that's the future where we go, wait a minute, I'm not going to start putting crap into the oceans. That's not good for anything. right? It's certainly not good for humanity, much less everything that lives in the ocean, right? And that is, I think, a potential future, but it requires us to wake up a little bit and say, you know what, uh, where this consciousness stuff is pointing, which is we're actually part of an interconnected ecosystem of ourselves as humans, along with all the other species on the planet, along with the planet itself. That's a beautiful picture, right? Because then we start to become truly stewards of a planet working for the benefit of the whole. And that's a beautiful place. So that's my hope.
I love your answers. You take one little thing and then you expand it into some like really beautiful explanation. No wonder you're a writer as well. I love it. I love it. Okay. I really wonder what you're going to do with number 3. One question you want to know the answer to the most.
Ooh, one question that I want to know the answer to the most. I had a conversation about this kind of in a related way last night with somebody, and so maybe it's just that that is on my mind. What is it that really stands between us being who and what we want to be as opposed to what it is that we are? Right. And so I have my theories about that in terms of insecurities and fears and trauma at the individual and societal and whatever level. So there's theories about that. But at the end of the day, you know, the it is proposed by many that it's a matter of a decision, that making that change is a question of just stepping back at one moment and saying, no, I'm just going to do it. So if that's the case, why is it so hard? What really makes that so much of a challenge, right? What stands in there? Well, we know that there are people who are going off and doing things that are miraculous. This woman we were talking about summoning stuff, but it doesn't have to be like that, right? Like spoon bending. There's I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of people who have bent spoons. Why is it that some people can't bend spoons? What stands in the way? What is the nature of that? And what is it that we could really do if there is a single answer, which it probably is not, uh, to help somebody cross through that barrier so that they can really have an experience that to them gives them the strength and the motivation to really go through a transformative process. I feel like if I could get the answer to that, that's something I would be so excited to shout from the mountaintops, like this is this, go, and then like that would be an incredible catalyst to changing the way the world looks.
Wasn't there an answer in The Matrix when when what is this name? Oh my god, I'm like
Neo,
blanking on names.
Neo is like,
Neo,
don't,
thank you. Neo was like trying to bend spoons or saw other kids bend spoons, and this oracle was
yep,
basically whoop, like telling him how to do it. I mean,
right,
there's an answer there.
yeah.
No,
It's don't try to bend the spoon. Realize that there isn't a spoon.
exactly. There you
Yeah,
go.
but it's, that's the challenge. How do you get through the illusion that we've placed the universe into the words and forgotten that the words were only ever supposed to be a description of the universe. But having done that, now we tie ourselves into the description,
Mm.
and we think that the description is the essence instead of just a way of looking at it, and we get trapped there. It's a
So
really,
basically, how to get through all the filters that your brain is imposing on you,
yeah, right.
or do you
Uh,
have imposed through your
yep,
brain?
right. Yep. That we put in place, and they're very functional, and they have allowed us to live and to buy soup. I don't know how to avoid that example, right? Like to do the day-to-day functions that we do. They're incredibly practical, and yet there's so many examples of cases that say, well, they are useful, but they're not actually the foundational reality. Well, what does it take to allow people to get to that? And in part, there's lots of very good answers for why a lot of people aren't there. If you're trying to figure out where your next meal comes from, it's tough to talk philosophy, right? No, I just need a dry place to sleep tonight. Well, yes,
Sure.
that does have to take precedence, right? I need to figure out what I'm going to eat next. That has to take precedence over having some philosophical conversation. But if there's a way to somehow provide some one next step better for all of those sorts of things, it would be really nice. And I'd love to know what the key to unlock that boundary is,
Hmm.
for people in general.
Well, you're also bringing up some things that we haven't talked about and today at all, which was free will and how much free will do we really have in our lives. But Jeff Dunne, Dr. Jeff Dunne, thank you so much for being on this podcast. It's been truly a pleasure speaking with you.
Like,
I really wish we would have had more time so I can kind of go into all of these other details that you went to because there's so much you brought up. I don't
well,
even know
maybe
how
we
you
do
hold.
another one at some point, and then we'll talk about free will, and which is also a fantastic question. And
Oh my gosh, yes. And the funny thing is, I think I went into this thinking, oh, I'm going to talk about consciousness, free will, and because there's so many other things you brought up that we had to like segue into that were so important, free will was not
yeah,
even touched, which is totally fine. Um, but thank you very much, and good luck with all of the endeavors that you're having in the future for yourself, or in the past, or in the present, whatever. Time is not of an
that's
essence
right.
here.
All the endeavors, just just all the endeavors. So
There
no,
we
thank
go.
you so much for the opportunity to talk and for the experience, which has been absolutely fantastic. It's been a joy. Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in and listening. This is the end of season 1, and I really look forward to you tuning in again at the end of August for season 2. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share the Quantum Couch with someone you think might love this space too. If you would like to reach out, you can email me at thequantumcouch@gmail.com. You can also follow me on Instagram and Facebook. Just search for The Quantum Couch. Thank you for listening. Until next time, I'm Dr. Ina Conboy. Take good care, stay curious, and keep exploring. The information in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Listening to this podcast does not create a physician-patient relationship with Dr. Ina Conboy or any guest on this podcast. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you heard on this podcast.